NATO seeks to answer yet another Russian invasion, this one of Ukraine. As effective as this organization has been in recent years, why should anyone trust anything they allegedly decide? There is much more to the actions of ISIS than seeking revenge for American airstrikes. Is it simply inevitable, and perhaps even correct, that we are drawn into this war? And for those who believe conspiracy theories are real and in the midst of every minute of every day, we have the truth. Maybe. I'm Ed Berliner. Buckle up as we question everything for Wednesday, August 28th, 2014.
The Russian military now being directly involved in fighting Ukrainian government forces in two key locations, near the large key city of Donetsk, and as you mentioned, they're also by the coast on the Sea of Azov. That's a key location as well, and it's also one where there has not been significant recent fighting, so it is potentially opening a new front in this conflict. Now, if this is true, this could be the Russian move that Western governments have been warning about for some time, a move to directly intervene to try and change the momentum on the ground because of recent Ukrainian government gains in the fighting.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was forged in the days after World War II, designed as a deterrent against the type of savagery the Nazis and their allies waged on the world. It is designed by charter to the mutual defense in response to an attack by an external party, peacekeepers in Europe. But there are those who consistently question if NATO can honestly do anything in the modern world, if they have the will it takes, and if anyone truly fears them or hears anything save for platitudes and saber-rattling. Let us welcome into MidPoint former Army Lieutenant Colonel, Army Ranger, highly decorated after serving in theaters such as Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq, former member of the Oklahoma Senate, and this week winner of the Republican nomination for the 5th Congressional District in Oklahoma, Steve Russell. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for being here again.
Well, thank you.
Is there any doubt in your mind whatsoever that what we have heard today from the Ukrainians, that Russian troops are on the ground and have invaded their country, that this is a flat-out act of war?
It sure appears that way from what the intelligence reports are that are coming from our NATO allies, Poland, Germany. We also see the cooperative states, the Baltic states, that are very concerned with the situation. And I think that we have to unify on this issue. We do have an awful lot of economic, diplomatic, and even military power embodied in NATO, and also those member states of the Office of Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Let us then get to the issue of NATO itself and the points that are raised a few moments ago. When you talk to so many people in and out of the intelligence community, simply people on the street, they'll tell you sometimes that the United Nations and NATO work on almost the exact same level. They are, and this is the opinion of many, completely useless, and they get nothing done whatsoever to stop aggressors. Is there any reason for people to believe that that is actually the case, or is it something different?
Well, I think the difference between any United Nations action and NATO action is you won't have Russia sitting on the Security Council vetoing any statements or anything that would come out. Any condemnations we would see maybe only come from the General Assembly, because Russia is a veto power on the Security Council. NATO, on the other hand, is much different. And we have not only member states that are adjacent to this current crisis, but it is something that collectively you've got some of the most powerful economic partners among the G7 that could play a significant role. And you have some very strong leaders, unlike, I think, here at home in Great Britain and Germany. And if we show a united front and the president would lead, I do think that we could get something significant to deter this crisis.
You mentioned Germany, of course. Let me speak to the will to actually get something done and go up against the Russians. Angela Merkel and the Germans, very cozy here recently. Of course, you bring Great Britain into it and America, and you said there's an awful lot involved here economically. So does NATO and the commanding members of NATO, the ones that will make a difference, do they have the will to look square in the eye to Vladimir Putin and say, you've invaded a country, it's time to get out or else?
I think that there could be the will if we see leadership there. Angela Merkel has shown some leadership. We had David Cameron's comments today, very strong. And what is possible is that we could, through a cooperative effort, I liken it to about the Rhineland crisis, when If the French and the British had just acted in 34, there would have been a stare down of all of these problems. Instead, they continued to fester and they continued to grow. We are probably at that crisis. If we show weakness now, then it will turn into bloodshed in the future at a much, much higher cost. Collectively, Russia does not want a war. Economically, they do not want a war. We do need to keep the dialogue open. I don't believe the Russians are our traditional enemy, even though they have been our traditional Cold War enemy. They have been our allies in almost every other effort that we've ever been into. Economically, this would be a disaster for them.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, we made promises to Ukraine in the early 90s, and we said, if you will get rid of your nuclear arsenal, we will then provide security for you. And so they did in good faith, thinking that they had the backing of NATO and the United States if they ever faced a crisis like this. Now it's time for us to show all of our diplomatic will and all of our economic will, and we do need to even show some military will through the accords of the Office of Security and Cooperation of Europe.
If, as you say, the Russians do not want a war, then why are they taking the stance of a nation that is invading and seem to be ready for war?
Because they believe they can get it without going to war. And if they think they can get it, they will. Russia's motivations are very easy to understand. Like Winston Churchill stated, you can always figure out what they're going to do. Once you figure out, they will always act on their own national interest. Well, okay, so there it is. They would like to get Ukraine. They would like to get all of the restored territory that they had from Soviet times. And Lithuania and Latvia, they put out statements today of grave concern because you have this wedge of Russian territory there with Kaliningrad in the Baltic Sea. They may want to connect the dots, and if they connect the dots to this Russian territory, it goes through the Baltic states, and that's just not good. So we will see instability if we have inaction. Now is not the time for inaction. It's time for strong action and will.
Do you fall on the side of those who believe that Putin wants a war because he knows it will help him? Russians, according to some people, love to go to war. They want to go to war. It is something that is ingrained in their own system, and it's not a bad thing when you talk to the people there. This, again, is the opinion of some experts that they like it.
I think Russia, at the end of the day, would like to see things done diplomatically and economically. But if they can maneuver and acquire old territory without getting to the brink of war, they're going to do it. They see the weakness. They see the inaction. They see the diversions that our current president is having in multiple places, his complete inability to handle foreign policy crises. It's just a great opportunity for them to try to maneuver as far as they can go. But now we need to see leadership in Europe. And even if the United States were not to be the lead player, I mean, if they're waiting for the president to get off of the golf course and fly to Brussels and figure out a plan, it may be too late. I was very encouraged by David Cameron's comments today and Angela Merkel's. They have to lead. We need to put something together.
Knowing full well that there's a number of leaders in Europe that simply don't respect the president, don't respect the United States at this point, is there anything he can do at this time to be able to bring some of that respect back to a level where at least if he gets involved, they will respect his involvement, they will see America getting involved, or is simply that passed us by?
No, I don't think it's passed us by. In fact, I think there's a number of things that the president could do. We've seen in world crises in the past, Ed, where they would take a former president and they would send them on some mission for negotiation. We could see the president, for example, he could say, I'm altering my schedule. We're flying to Brussels. I'm meeting with the key members of NATO, and we are going to meet. Okay, that shows leadership, and it shows that you're serious. And we also could see, like we saw President Bush, who would use President Clinton for some diplomatic mission, or we've seen in the case former presidents using a previous administration's president to go and make discussion. Bring out George Bush. Have him go. Have him talk and negotiate. That would send a strong signal to the world, and it would make our country look like the strong country it is, although we're showing great weakness today.
We have talked a little bit here about NATO, but also I mentioned the United Nations at the top here. There is an emergency meeting of the Security Council here. About a minute or so that I have left, you touched on this briefly a few moments ago. Is that simply an exercise in futility, knowing full well that the Russians sit there on the Security Council and they'll pretty much stop anything in its tracks?
Well, it does help if you have the condemnation of world opinion. That does give you a moral backing. It does give you goodwill from other nations. It does give you less resistance from neutral nations. But NATO has to lead collectively. This is not a crisis that NATO cannot collectively solve. They can solve it. They have to show leadership.
30 seconds. Do you believe they, NATO specifically, without America, has the leadership that is willing to step up and do what needs to be done?
I think I do think that there are leaders in Germany and Great Britain. They've been down this road before. They've lived it firsthand. They do not like what they're seeing, and they may just act on their own with NATO. That's right. They're member states equal to the United States, and they can collectively come together, and then we will be forced to participate. I think it would be disastrous if we become so uninvolved that we would let them take the lead. But I think that this is a crisis where they have to demonstrate we're going to act, and then this thing could settle out peacefully.
They can. Let's see if they will. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much, sir. We'll talk to you again. All right, later on this hour, news call. A 9-year-old with an automatic weapon. That and more coming up right here.